My name is Ashley Turner. I am 26 years old. And on the morning of my 18th birthday, my father sat across from me at the kitchen table, poured himself a second cup of coffee, and told me that the $50,000 my grandmother had spent 22 years saving for my education was gone. He didn't yell. He didn't apologize. He explained it the way you'd explain a delayed flight or a parking ticket, calmly, patiently, as if the inconvenience were mine and the fault were nobody's in particular. There was a situation with the investment, he said. I made a judgment call. These things happen in business, Ashley. You'll understand when you're older. You're smart. You'll figure out college on your own. Plenty of kids do. I sat there with my hands around my orange juice glass. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, looking at this man I had called my father for 18 years, and I felt something inside me go very, very still. What he didn't know was that I had already started to suspect something was wrong. What he didn't know was that the stillness he mistook for acceptance was actually the beginning of something else entirely. What he didn't know was that I was going to spend the next 6 years building a case against him, so airtight, so methodically documented, so precisely assembled, that a civil attorney with 11 years of trust litigation experience would look at my file and say, he didn't just mismanage the trust. He documented his own crime in an email. This is that story. My grandmother's name was Eleanor Marsh. She was my mother's mother, a small woman with thick-knuckled hands and reading glasses she kept on a beaded chain around her neck. She worked her entire adult life as a seamstress and a part-time bookkeeper for a dry goods company that closed in 2009. She drove a 2003 Honda Civic from the day she bought it until the transmission died on the highway near her home in Clarksburg when I was 13. She never replaced it. She took the bus after that. Eleanor never took a vacation, not one. In the summers, she would visit us for 2 weeks, sleeping in the pull-out bed in the room I shared with my younger brother, Tyler. And she would spend those 2 weeks cooking, helping my mother with the garden, and taking me to the public library, where she let me check out as many books as I could carry. She had a particular love for organizing things. She organized her coupons by category in a small accordion folder. She organized her closet by season and then by color. And from the time I was born, she organized her savings with one purpose. She was going to make sure her granddaughter never had to worry about how to pay for college. She died of a stroke in the spring when I was 14 years old. I was in the middle of 8th grade. The funeral was on a Tuesday. 3 years later, I would learn that Eleanor had saved $47,000 over the course of my lifetime and placed it in a trust account in my name with my father, David Turner, named as trustee. The trust document was specific. Eleanor had written the restriction herself in simple, plain language with the guidance of a notary at the county clerk's office. The money was for Ashley's higher education expenses only. My father, David, is 54 years old. He is a regional sales manager at a pharmaceutical distribution company and earns $94,000 a year. He drives a leased Jeep Grand Cherokee. He coaches youth baseball on weekends and has done so for 11 years. In our community, he is known as Coach Dave, the kind of man who gets a standing ovation at the end of season banquet. The kind of man whose name appears in the local paper every spring with a photograph of him kneeling in the infield dirt, surrounded by 10-year-olds in red jerseys. The kind of man that parents trust with their children because he looks so thoroughly, reassuringly trustworthy. Nobody outside our family knew what he did, and inside our family, nobody talked about it. My father had a gift for making the things he did feel like things that had simply happened to everyone equally. Like weather, like bad luck, like a situation beyond anyone's control. My mother, Sandra, is 51. She knew. She had known since I was 17 years old, before the transfers were even complete, and she had chosen to stay quiet. I did not know this when I was 18. I would not know it until I was 23, when a text message she sent and immediately tried to unsend told me everything I needed to know about how deep the silence ran in my family. My father's closest friend since college was a man named Craig Whitfield. Craig was 52, optimistic to the point of recklessness, and in 2016 he had what he described as a world-changing idea for a logistics software startup he called RootSync. He raised investor capital from a small circle of people who trusted him. My father was one of them. The investment my father made into RouteSync was $41,000. He made it in 3 separate wire transfers from my grandmother's trust account: $18,000 in March, $14,000 in July, and $9,000 in November of the year I was 17. He did this while I was a junior in high school, taking the ACT for the second time, researching scholarship applications, building the future Eleanor had spent 22 years funding. RootSync failed completely within 14 months of launch. Craig Whitfield lost every investor's capital, closed the company, filed for bankruptcy protection, and moved to Denver. My father has not spoken Craig's name to me since the morning of my 18th birthday. He never will. I want you to understand who my father was in those years, because it matters. He was not a desperate man. He was not in debt. He was not gambling or drinking or drowning. He made $94,000 a year. He had a retirement account, a mortgage he could service, a leased vehicle, season tickets to the minor league baseball team 2 towns over. He took the money from my grandmother's trust not because he had to. He took it because he was the trustee, because he thought he could double it before I turned 18, and because he did not believe for a single moment that there would be consequences. For a long time he was right about that last part. I started college in the fall at a state university 4 hours from home. I had a small academic scholarship and a federal loan package and $4,700 I had saved from working at a grocery store since I was 16. That first semester, I got a job waitressing at a restaurant 3 blocks from campus. By spring, I had added a weekend shift at a pharmacy near the student housing complex. By my sophomore year, I was also tutoring freshman accounting students at $12 an hour through the University Tutoring Center. I worked 3 jobs for 4 years. I was good at managing them. I became very good at managing a great many things simultaneously, at keeping parallel tracks running without letting one derail the others. I became good at not letting how tired I was show on my face. In the spring of my sophomore year, I missed my grandmother's memorial dinner, the annual dinner my mother hosted on Eleanor's birthday, because I was covering a double shift at the restaurant to make the rent payment on my apartment. I did not tell anyone why I missed it. I sent flowers and called the next morning. My father attended my college graduation. He stood on the lawn afterward in a blue blazer, holding a small bouquet of white carnations, and he took photographs on his phone, while I stood in my cap and gown in the afternoon sun. He posted one of those photographs to Facebook that evening. The caption read, "So proud of my daughter. She earned every bit of this." I saw the post that night from my apartment, sitting on the edge of my bed with my diploma still in the envelope. I read it twice. Then I took a screenshot. I added it to a folder I had been building for 4 years. I should go back. The summer after my freshman year, I took an introductory accounting course as a requirement for my major. The professor, a compact, precise woman named Dr. Renner, who wore the same black blazer 3 days a week and tolerated no imprecision, spent one lecture on the legal obligations of trustees. Fiduciary duty. The word comes from the Latin word for trust. A trustee does not own the assets in the trust. A trustee is the legal steward of those assets on behalf of the beneficiary. The trustee has a duty of loyalty, a duty of care, and a duty to follow the explicit terms of the trust instrument. Deviation from those terms, especially deviation for personal financial benefit, is not a business mistake. It is a breach. It may be a crime. I sat in that lecture hall with my notebook open, and I did not write a single word for 20 minutes. Something had clicked into place. Something I had been carrying in an unexamined way for a year had suddenly acquired a name and a legal framework, and with it a shape. That summer I went home for 3 weeks. I asked my mother if she knew where the trust documents were. She looked at me for a long moment and said she would ask my father. She never asked him. Or if she did, she never told me the answer. I wrote to the county clerk's office in the county where Eleanor had lived. I submitted a formal records request. I received, 6 weeks later, a certified copy of Eleanor's trust document. I read it on a Tuesday evening in my dorm room with a highlighter and a legal pad. The restriction was there in plain language exactly as Eleanor had written it. The funds were designated for Ashley Margaret Turner's higher education expenses only, and could not be redirected for any other purpose without court approval and written consent of the beneficiary. Upon her reaching majority, my father had never sought court approval. He had never informed me. I had not consented. I had not even known. I opened a folder on my laptop. I labeled it simply with Eleanor's name. Over the next 5 years, methodically and without urgency, I built that folder the way an auditor builds a case file. By the time I graduated at 22 and began working as a junior auditor at a regional accounting firm, I had the trust document, the county records, and the name of the bank where the trust account had been held. I submitted a formal records request to the bank through the trust account number I found in the original document. It took 4 months and 2 follow-up letters, but eventually I received what I had asked for, the account statements for the trust account from its opening through its closure. 3 wire transfers, $18,000, $14,000, $9,000. Each one clearly labeled in the memo field with a reference to the joint investment account David held with Craig Whitfield. Each one dated, each one time-stamped. I printed them. I put them in the folder. Then I went back to work. I found the RootSync bankruptcy filing through public federal court records. The filing listed David Turner as an investor. It listed the total amount of investor capital lost. It listed the date of the company's dissolution. I printed it. I put it in the folder. I was 23 when I found the text messages. My mother and I were speaking regularly by then. We had developed a careful, managed relationship where we talked about my work and her garden and avoided everything else. In October of that year, she sent me a text at 11:30 at night. The text read, "I told him not to do it, Ashley. I told him in July when he called me from Craig's office. I said, David, this is the children's money, and he said he was going to fix it before you turned 18. I'm so sorry. I've been sorry for a long time." Then, 6 seconds later, the message disappeared. She had unsent it using a feature her phone had just updated to include. I had already taken the screenshot. I sat with that screenshot for a long time. I did not call her. I did not confront her. I added it to the folder, and I made a note on my legal pad. Mom knew before transfers 3 and 2, possibly before transfer 1. Confirmed she raised objection. Confirms knowledge and complicity. Then I closed the laptop and made dinner and went to bed. If you are still watching, I want you to do something for me right now. Drop a comment below and tell me whether you have ever had to be the calm one in a situation where you had every right to fall apart. I read every single comment on this channel, and I will read yours. And while you are there, if this story is speaking to something you have carried, please subscribe. There are more stories here for you. I was 24 when I found the email. I had been thinking for some time about whether there was documentation of the decision itself, not just the transfers which showed what had been done, but something that showed what my father knew when he did it. The transfers were damning, but a skilled lawyer could argue they represented a trustee's good faith investment decision, however misguided. I needed something that showed he understood the restriction and chose to disregard it. Craig Whitfield had moved to Denver after RouteSync failed. He was working in logistics consulting. He had a LinkedIn profile and a public email address. I drafted a message to him carefully over several evenings, and I want to be clear about what I did and did not do. I did not lie to him, I did not impersonate anyone, and I did not ask him for anything he was not legally free to provide. I introduced myself by name. I told him I was Eleanor Turner's granddaughter, and that I was looking into the trust account that had been used to invest in RootSync. I told him I was not contacting him to place blame on him. I asked him only if he had any email correspondence from that period that he would be willing to share. Craig Whitfield responded within 48 hours. His email was 3 paragraphs long. In the second paragraph, he wrote that he had always felt guilty about what happened and that he had kept the email chain because he had wanted to speak to someone about it for years. Attached to his email was a thread of 7 messages between him and my father from the summer when I was 17. In the 4th message of that chain, my father wrote, "Moving the second tranche this week. Using some of Ashley's fund for this one. The education account. She doesn't need it until next year anyway." Craig's reply, "You sure that's okay? Isn't that restricted?" My father's reply, 3 hours later, "I'm the trustee. I make the calls." I printed the email thread. I read it once. I put it in the folder. That was the moment I stopped being the girl whose father had stolen her grandmother's savings and started becoming the woman who was going to make him answer for it. I spent my 25th year working, saving, and researching civil trust litigation attorneys in our county. I made appointments with 3 of them. The first one was pleasant, but said the case was complex and the evidence, while compelling, might be difficult to monetize. The second one wanted a large retainer and seemed more interested in a quick settlement than in building toward what the evidence actually supported. The third one was a woman named Patricia Walsh. Patricia Walsh had been practicing trust litigation for 11 years. She had a clean office and a habit of taking notes with a mechanical pencil and saying very little until she had finished reading whatever you had put in front of her. I gave her the folder. She read it for 2 hours while I sat across from her and drank the coffee her assistant had brought and looked out the window at the parking structure across the street. When she finished, she set the last document down and looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. "This is one of the cleanest breach of fiduciary duty cases I have seen in 11 years, she said. He didn't just mismanage the trust. He documented his own crime in an email. We talked for another hour about the shape of the case. Patricia explained the legal theory: breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of trust assets, unjust enrichment. She walked me through the damages calculation, not just the original $41,000, but interest calculated from the date of the first transfer, student loan debt I had incurred as a direct result of the fund being emptied, documented lost earnings from the time I spent working 3 jobs instead of completing a field internship during my junior year, and legal fees. We talked about whether to file in civil court or to pursue mediation first. Patricia's preference, given the quality of the evidence, was to file first and use the lawsuit as leverage toward a mediation settlement. She believed it would resolve before trial. She asked me when I wanted to file. I told her March 3rd. March 3rd was my 26th birthday. I had chosen it 4 years earlier, sitting at my desk with Eleanor's trust document in my hands, and I had held the date in my mind ever since, the way you hold a compass bearing, not a destination yet, just a direction. Patricia filed the lawsuit in county civil court on the morning of March 3rd. I was at work when she sent me the confirmation. I went to the break room, poured a cup of coffee, and stood by the window for 4 minutes. Then I went back to my desk. My father was served with the lawsuit papers on a Thursday evening at 6:15 in the afternoon. It was a weekday practice session for the youth baseball team he coached. The process server found him on the field near the first baseline and handed him the envelope in front of 4 other coaches and 2 parents who were sitting in the bleachers watching the end of practice. David Turner called my cell phone at 6:22 that evening. I did not answer. He called again at 6:41. I did not answer. He called at 7:15 and again at 7:53. I did not answer any of them. At 8:17, my phone rang with my mother's number. I answered on the second ring. Ashley. Her voice was tight, careful. "Hi, Mom. I think you know why I'm calling." "I do." A pause. "Ashley, your father is, Mom." I kept my voice even. "I know why you're calling. I have nothing to say about the case. If Dad wants to respond, he can do it through his lawyer." I paused for 1 second. "I love you. I'll talk to you soon." And I hung up. My father hired a defense attorney named Greg Holloway, who charged $350 an hour, and who, by my attorney's account, immediately recognized that the email evidence was catastrophic for his client. Greg advised David that the phrase, "I'm the trustee, I make the calls," written in direct response to Craig asking whether it was okay to use restricted educational funds, eliminated the most common trustee defense, the argument that the trustee had exercised good faith investment judgment without understanding the restriction. There was no good faith in that email. There was only awareness and dismissal. Greg requested mediation rather than proceeding to trial. Patricia agreed. The mediation was scheduled for April 14th at a neutral office downtown, a conference room on the 7th floor of a building that overlooked the river. I arrived 20 minutes early. I set my portfolio on the table in front of the chair I had chosen, the chair at the far end facing the door. I had a cup of coffee from the lobby cafe. I straightened the portfolio. I adjusted my blazer. And then I waited. My father walked in at 9:02 with Greg Holloway and my mother. I had not seen David Turner in 4 months. He had aged in a way that I noticed and then set aside. He was wearing a gray suit I recognized from family events years ago. He looked at me when he walked in. I looked back. I did not smile. I did not look away. I waited. My mother found a chair along the wall and folded her hands in her lap. She did not look at me. The mediator was a retired circuit court judge named Howard Callum, a tall man in his late 60s with silver hair and reading glasses on a lanyard. He opened the session with a brief procedural overview and then turned to Patricia. Patricia presented the case in 20 minutes. She was economical and precise. She introduced the trust document, recited the education-only restriction, and established the chain of authority. Eleanor to David as trustee, with Ashley as sole beneficiary. She presented the bank transfer records, 3 transfers, 3 dates, $41,000. She presented the RootSync bankruptcy filing. She presented Craig Whitfield's email chain and read, without emphasis, my father's exact words. I'm the trustee. I make the calls. She noted that this statement was made in direct response to an explicit question about whether it was permissible to use restricted trust funds. Then she set down her documents. She picked up one more. She read my father's Facebook caption aloud, without preface, without commentary. So proud of my daughter. She earned every bit of this. The room was completely silent. I looked at the table in front of me. Greg Holloway requested a 15-minute recess. Judge Callum granted it. My father and Greg left the room. Patricia made a small note in the margin of her legal pad. I drank my coffee. I did not move from my chair. When they returned, Greg Holloway presented an opening settlement offer of $41,000, the exact principal amount, no interest, no additional damages. Patricia did not respond to the number. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. The itemized demand she and I had prepared together, $41,000 in principal, $18,600 in interest, calculated from the date of the first transfer at standard civil judgment rates, $22,000 in student loan debt incurred as a direct and documented result of the trust being emptied, $12,000 in documented lost earnings from the time Ashley worked 3 concurrent jobs during college in lieu of completing a professional internship, $8,400 in legal fees. Total, $102,000. My father read the page. He set it down. He looked up. That's insane. Greg Holloway put one hand on his arm. Patricia said calmly and without heat, Mr. Turner, your client documented his intent in writing, used a trust explicitly restricted to educational expenses for a personal investment, and then publicly celebrated his daughter's graduation achievement that his own actions made significantly harder. We are prepared to go to trial. We are prepared to introduce the email, the Facebook post, and testimony from individuals associated with the RootSync bankruptcy proceedings. We are also prepared to ensure that, should this proceed to public record, the findings are available to any organization with which your client is currently affiliated. A pause. Not long. Or your client can settle today. My father looked at me. For the first time since he had sat down, he looked directly at me. I was looking at my coffee cup. Greg Holloway leaned over and spoke in a low voice for approximately 40 seconds. My father closed his eyes. He kept them closed for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then he opened them and looked at Greg and said quietly, "We'll settle." The settlement was finalized that afternoon. $102,000. Wire transfer within 10 business days. There was a non-disclosure clause David's lawyer had requested and Patricia had accepted with a single modification. The NDA covered public statements only. It did not prevent me from telling my story privately, to anyone I chose. My father signed the document and stood. He looked at me one final time across the length of the table, and he said, "I hope this is what you wanted." I looked up from putting my copy of the settlement into my portfolio. I met his eyes. What I wanted was my grandmother's money used the way she intended. Since that's no longer possible, this is the next best thing. I closed the portfolio. "Tell Mom I'll call her next week." He left. I stayed in my chair for another minute. I finished my coffee. Then I thanked Judge Callum and Patricia and walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. In the weeks that followed, my father called twice. Both calls went to voicemail. In the first message, he said he wanted to talk, that he had made mistakes, that he hoped I could find it in myself to understand that people were complicated and that one mistake did not define a person. In the second message, he said nothing for a few seconds and then said, "I'm sorry, Ashley, I mean that." Then he hung up. I listened to both messages. I did not return either call. My mother and I spoke the following week as I had promised. It was a long conversation. She cried. I did not. I asked her a question I had been carrying since I was 23 years old, since the night the unsent text had told me everything. I asked her why she had not told me. She said she had been afraid of what would happen to the family. She said she had convinced herself that it was in the past, and that knowing would only hurt me. She said she was sorry. I told her I believed she was sorry. I told her that sorry and forgiven were two different things, and that I needed more time. She said she understood. We hung up carefully, like two people lowering something fragile into a box. I am still deciding what my relationship with my mother will look like. That is an honest answer. It is not a closed door, but it is not an open one either. Some things take longer than a settlement to resolve. The wire transfer arrived on a Thursday morning, 10 business days after the mediation. I was at my desk at work when the notification appeared on my phone. I looked at it for a moment. Then I forwarded it to my personal email, printed it when I got home that evening, and put it in a frame I had bought the week before from a home goods store 2 blocks from my apartment. I hung the frame on the wall of my apartment next to a photograph of Eleanor. A photograph taken in the summer I was 9 years old, in the garden behind her house, her reading glasses on their beaded chain, her hands full of tomatoes she had just pulled from the vine, squinting into the afternoon light and smiling at whoever was holding the camera. I paid off my $22,000 in student loans in a single payment the following Monday morning. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and typed in the payoff amount and pressed submit and watched the confirmation screen appear. My grandmother had saved that money so that debt would never exist. It existed for 8 years. Now it doesn't. I made a donation the same week to a local scholarship fund for first-generation college students. $4,700. $100 for every year Eleanor saved. My grandmother worked for 22 years and never took a vacation. She drove a used Civic until it broke down on the highway. She kept her coupons in an accordion folder organized by category. She saved $47,000 and trusted a man to protect it, and he spent $41,000 of it in 11 months on a startup that failed inside 14 months and left nothing behind. I spent 6 years building a case. I did it the way Eleanor would have done it, methodically, without waste, without drama, one document at a time. I did not do it out of anger, though anger was there in the beginning like an ember I learned to leave alone. I did it because Eleanor's money was meant for a purpose, and that purpose was not served. And the only way I knew how to honor what she had given me was to account for it, to make it mean something, to close the ledger. There is something I have thought about often in the months since the mediation. My father sat across from me that morning, and he was the same man who had coached 10-year-olds on Tuesday evenings for 11 years. The same man who smiled in the photographs on his Facebook page. The same man who stood at my college graduation with white carnations and felt, I think, genuinely proud. He had simply never believed there would be a morning when I showed up at a conference table on the 7th floor, with 6 years of his own words arranged in front of him. The people who underestimate you rarely do it out of cruelty. They do it because their picture of you is fixed. They decided who you were when you were too young to contradict them, and they never updated the file. My father decided I was the kind of daughter who would let things go for the family's sake. He was not entirely wrong about me. I did let things go. For a long time. I just let them go into a folder. I think about Eleanor often. I think about the bus she took to work after the Civic died. I think about the accordion folder. I think about the fact that she never once, as far as I know, told anyone she was making that sacrifice. She just made it. Quietly, year after year, because she believed in what it was for. My grandmother saved for 22 years, so I would never have to struggle the way she did. My father spent that money in 11 months. I spent 6 years making sure it came back. I think she would have understood the interest. If someone you trusted, a parent, a spouse, a sibling, anyone, has ever used that trust against you, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments what happened and what you did about it. I read every single one. And if this story reached something you have been carrying quietly, please share it with someone else who might need to hear it today.